Okay, so good day everyone. For our module number 1, so this is entitled Introduction to Assurance Engagement. Okay, so before we proceed with the discussion proper, so let us have a sort of overview about the contents of this module. Okay, so this module will cover the fundamental concepts of assurance engagements. So you will learn about the international framework for assurance engagements, in which our Philippine standards on auditing also are anchored and is related to. The definition and objectives, scope and elements of this framework, as well as the acceptance of engagements, and the difference between a reasonable and limited assurance engagements will be discussed. Okay, for the learning outcomes, so at the end of this module, you will be familiarized and understand the international framework for assurance engagements, familiarize and understand as well its definition, objectives, okay, of assurance engagement. You will be able to identify the scope and element of the assurance engagement, understand the engagement acceptance and the inappropriate use of the practitioner's name, and lastly is to identify the difference between a reasonable assurance and limited assurance engagements. For the indicative content of this module, so we have the following topics. So we will have the introduction to IFAE, definition of assurance engagements, the scope of international framework for assurance engagements, engagement acceptance, elements of an assurance engagement, the inappropriate use of the practitioner's name, and the difference between reasonable and limited assurance engagements. Okay, so to start with, let us begin the discussion with the international framework for assurance engagements. Okay, so this framework, this contents, the contents of this framework includes the definition and description of the elements and objectives of an assurance engagement. So it also identifies engagements to which international standards on auditing, in which our PSA or Philippine Standards on Auditing is also anchored or related to, as well as the International Standards on Review Engagements or ISREs, and International Standards on Assurance Engagements or ISAEs apply. Okay, so this framework is comprehensive. Okay, so it includes other and describe or define other standards as well that is related to auditing and assurance engagements. So this framework provides a frame of reference for the following. So here, IFAE includes professional accountants in practice, or this is what we call the practitioners. So this IFAE covers professional accountants in public practice. Okay, so the other term for them is, we call them also as practitioners. So here, this is a focus especially when performing their assurance engagements, okay, related activities. So the professional accountants in the public sector refer to the public sector perspective at the end of the framework. Okay, so basically, this is related to the difference later on the discussion later on about the difference between a limited and assurance engagements. Okay, so here, another thing is this framework also cover professional accountants who are neither in public practice nor in public sector. Okay, so here they are encouraged to consider the framework when performing their assurance engagement. So meaning to say here, whether you are a professional accountant in public practice or in public sector, or even a private practitioner, or uh, even you are not part of this group of professional accountants, but you are engaged in performing assurance services, so you are bound also to consider this framework. Okay, so you will follow, or you're encouraged to follow the pronouncements or the guidelines that is being given by this framework, for you to be guided on what to do and not to do in performing assurance services or engagements. Okay, so another is this framework also covers others which are involved with assurance engagement, including the intended users of the assurance report and the responsible party. Okay, so this part right here, okay, this parties, the intended users and the responsible party. So we will discuss this later on in the elements of assurance engagements. So however, we will define it as a sort of an overview or introduction, okay, on who are these intended users and responsible party are. So when we say intended users, so these are the stockholders who are using financial statements for their decision if they will still continue to become a part of a business enterprise or a corporation, okay, depending on the status that is being reflected in the financial statements of such enterprise. So basically, in auditing the intended users, we mean it as someone who are using the financial statements for decision making. So here, basically, we refer them as the stockholders. Okay, so here, in practice, however, or in actual, or in the field of a business, there are a lot of intended users, even the management. Okay, however, when talking about assurance engagements, we usually refer intended users as the stockholders. Okay, because in this case, this responsible party, we mean this as the management of the enterprise, because here, a responsible party is the one who is responsible for preparing the financial statements. So normally in an organization, the ones who are preparing the financial statements is the accounting department. So they are part of the management, they are part of the organization. So they are responsible for the preparation and presentation of the financial statements, which are fairly presented. Okay, so responsible party here, we mean it as the management. Okay, and lastly, the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, or IAASB, in its development of these different standards, okay, they are also covered under this framework. Okay, so this framework does not itself establish standards. Okay, so, or they don't even provide procedural requirements for the performance of assurance engagements. Okay, so who then is preparing these standards? So ISA, ISREs, and ISAEs. So these standards contain the basic principles, essential procedures, and related guidance that is consistent with the concepts in this framework. So meaning to say, this framework is just a guideline or concept based, but the standards are normally created by this different standard or the IASB, in which they create the standards under these different classifications. So here, under this framework again, it only provides concepts for the performance of the assurance engagement. So we use it as a guide or foundation. So the relationship between the framework and the different standards is illustrated in the structure of pronouncements that is being issued by the IAASB. So they have this Handbook of International Auditing Assurance and Ethics Pronouncements. So that there they describe and illustrate how they are being related. But again, the framework provides concepts which are being used in the creation of the different standards, that is being followed and used in the performance of assurance engagements. So that is for our introduction about International Framework for Assurance Engagement.